Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz.
And I'm Brandis Friedman. On the show tonight,
we expect to receive 23,000 doses of the vaccine starting next week.
The city's public health commissioner joins us with what to expect from Chicago's rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine.
The airline industry has been devastated by the pandemic, losing flyers and billions of dollars. Will a vaccine be enough to revive it?
All of us will remember who was protecting us, which business owners and businesses.
Our Spotlight Politics team on the governor's reaction to violations to the state's COVID-19 restrictions.
Change, positive change. We have to do things differently.
The role of women in the legislature, with Springfield on the brink of a big cultural shift.
When people say, oh my God, you guys are trying to do so much, it's because Englewood needs so much.
Business owners and community organizers in Englewood talk about what's next 6 months after widespread civil unrest in the neighborhood.
And a concert at Lyric Opera of Chicago, unlike anything you've ever heard. But first, some of today's top stories. Pfizer's COVID vaccine could be in the possession of all 34 city hospitals by next week. Chicago is set to receive 23,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine in its initial shipment. It could come soon after and if FDA approval happens tomorrow. Lightfoot says the CDC will determine who gets the first batches. She says the city will eventually set up public mass vaccination sites. But Chicago Public Health Director Dr. Allison Arwady says that cooperation from community and health organizations will be key to the city's distribution plan.
We will be working as soon as we are able to push vaccine to partners. Our full goal is to push this vaccine to as many vaccinating partners as we can. So our goal will be that people will actually be able to get their vaccine through their provider, and we'll be asking them to prioritize outreach to their patients who are over 65 or who have these underlying conditions.
Both Mayor Lightfoot and Dr. Arwady caution that widespread distribution of the vaccine is still months away. And Dr. Arwady will join us on the program in just a few moments. Meanwhile, Illinois health officials are reporting more than 8,200 new COVID cases and 179 additional deaths in the last 24 hours. That makes for a total of 812,000 cases and 13,666 deaths. The test positivity across the state right now is 11.4%. And Lightfoot says she's spoken with 44th Ward Alderman Tom Tunney and says she's, quote, deeply disappointed. The alderman acknowledged he allowed indoor dining at Ann Sather's, the restaurant he owns on Belmont and Lakeview. City officials are investigating and could issue Tunney a $10,000 fine for violating city COVID protocols. Lightfoot says she expects there will be consequences.
The alderman knows that he did wrong. He will absolutely be held accountable. Zero exceptions for that. But I understand the anger and the frustration because this has been such an incredibly hard year.
And more on this story with our Spotlight Politics team just a bit later in the program. Some buzz around Chicago native Melody Hobson. The business executive and philanthropist will become chair of the board of Starbucks. It's a non-executive chair. Hobson has been on the board for 15 years there and is co-CEO of Chicago-based Ariel Investments. She's also married to Star Wars creator George Lucas. And now back to Brandis and Chicago's top doctor. Brandis.
Paris, thank you. And as you just reported, officials are detailing their COVID vaccine rollout plan today. An initial shipment of 23,000 doses is expected in Chicago as soon as next week, with healthcare workers receiving the vaccine first. Joining us with more about Chicago's COVID vaccine plan is Dr. Allison Arwady, Commissioner of the Chicago Department of Public Health. Dr. Arwady, thanks for fitting us in again. So first, please remind us, what are the recommendations on who should receive this vaccine first?
Sure. So we have to follow the CDC recommendations, which put in the first priority healthcare workers and long-term care facility, both workers and residents. And so that's what the whole first part of this phase is. Healthcare workers, we're starting with hospitals, but then we'll be expanding out from there. And that's all kinds of healthcare workers. We're talking home health aides, we're talking dentists. It's a wide range that we'll be talking, but it starts probably as soon as next week, potentially, with our hospitals.
And will this first shipment be enough for all of the healthcare workers in Chicago who need it?
Not at all. So we estimate we have about 400,000 healthcare workers in the city of Chicago using that broad definition. So 23,000 will be the first week, and then we'll be getting more week after week after week and pushing it to healthcare workers, to long-term care facilities, and then following up. And it's going to take a little while for sure to get through that group, but we're really excited to get started, assuming the FDA gives the emergency use authorization and the CDC recommends actually starting vaccination.
And then who's next after healthcare workers?
So we will be waiting to hear the formal guidance from the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices through the CDC. They've signaled that likely the next group will include essential workers as well as people over 65 and people with underlying conditions. That obviously is a lot of Chicagoans. And so even as we're waiting to hear some more details about potential sub-prioritization within that, we're already planning, thinking about for people who are over 65 and with underlying conditions, we'll be working closely with, for example, many doctors' offices and outpatient practices across Chicago. We'll be asking them to be reaching out to their partners, to their patients, so that people who are older with conditions will especially be able to get it through their doctor's offices. And then we'll be working on the essential worker side with employers. We'll be doing outreach in communities where the virus has hit hardest to ensure that as essential workers live in those neighborhoods, for example, they know how to get vaccinated. And then we'll be having some mass vaccination sites. They'll be by appointment initially, and we'll start with healthcare workers, but we're doing planning in all of these streams. We can handle all of the vaccine that is given to us by the federal government, and we've got plans that flex very large or very small, depending on what that supply chain looks like.
Now, during this afternoon's press conference, we also heard from Dr. Helene Gale of the Chicago Community Trust, speaking specifically about equity. Tell us how equity for communities of color factor into your vaccination plan.
Yes, so we have thought about equity and actually put it at the center of every phase of this vaccination plan. You've heard us talk a lot about equity already on the case side and on the testing side, and we're being more serious about it on the vaccine side because this is how we're eventually going to get past COVID. And so, for example, where even from the beginning, where we're thinking about healthcare workers, this is not just the doctors and the nurses. This is also thinking about people who are nurses' aides, people who are working sometimes in some of the more support roles, which may be lower paid and which we know in Chicago, a lot of both Black Chicagoans and Latinx Chicagoans fill those roles. We'll be specifically doing outreach and working to make sure that they know they can get vaccinated, and that once we're especially moving into some of the outpatient provider side, we'll be thinking about some of the lower paid healthcare workers and trying to prioritize them for appointments for vaccine in our mass vaccination sites. And it'll go on from there. We have to follow the federal guidance, but we implement that. And so we'll be pushing to make sure that some of our neighborhoods, and particularly in Black Chicago, where we've seen more deaths still than in any other group, we want to make sure that there's good messaging about the safety of the vaccine, the efficacy of the vaccine. We're doing everything we can to remove barriers so that people are excited about getting this vaccine to protect their communities. It also will be free of charge to Chicagoans.
Now, today in the UK, public health officials there are warning people who have a history of allergic reactions to medicine to skip the vaccine because of the case of a couple of people who've received it there having those reactions. How do you rectify that here? How do you deal with that here?
Yeah, so actually for all vaccines, we always have a plan for what's called anaphylaxis, this allergic reaction. Even if I'm giving a single dose of a vaccine, I have in my container the medicine you would use in case somebody has an allergic reaction. So it is something we plan for. I think in this case, with a new vaccine, certainly what the recommendation in the UK was that anyone who has a history of serious allergic reactions, enough where they might need to carry an EpiPen, for example, they've asked them to delay vaccination while they explore this. And this is exactly what will happen. As we roll out a new vaccine, we will be looking, really understanding, are there things we need to be prepared for? And if we need to change some of the guidance around who will be getting vaccine right at the beginning, we're ready to do that. About 0.5% of the people in the Pfizer trial had some kind of an allergic reaction. It was actually very similar to the group that got the placebo, not the real vaccine. But again, as the vaccine is available in in the real world, we also have a lot more opportunity to collect information about side effects or any concerns. There are robust plans for doing that at the city level, at the state level, and at the federal level. We want to be transparent and make sure people have the information they need to feel secure in their decision to hopefully become vaccinated when a vaccine is available for them.
And Dr. Arwady, there's still a lot of people who are still resistant to getting this vaccine once it becomes available to them, perhaps even some healthcare workers. But for some folks, it's a matter of mistrust in the medical community. What do you say to that?
Yeah, so I'd say there is a long history here that we want to acknowledge. I think particularly where we're talking with Black Chicagoans, really acknowledging the racist history that is absolutely part of the medical system and the public health system. This vaccine and our recommendations around it are absolutely based in science. The fact that this Pfizer vaccine in particular, which we're now able to share data about, 95% protective. That is an amazingly effective vaccine. And the efficacy was the same across different race, ethnicity groups, ages, genders, people with underlying conditions. We want to make sure that there has been good representation of both Black and Latinx Americans in these trials. And here in Chicago, we've seen that by and large. And we'll be wanting to share that data in detail so that people really can feel secure that this vaccine has had the appropriate testing, that the trials have not skipped steps, which they have not, and that we are watching closely for side effects. We were able to share today some of the data around side effects, things like sore arms, things like people feeling fatigued and having headache that came out of those trials. We will be making more of that data available on the website and really sharing that as we are on the one hand talking about how effective this vaccine is, we're thrilled that there were not any serious safety concerns identified, but we want people to understand that there will probably be some of these lower level side effects. That's to be expected.
All right, and Dr. Allison Arwady, we look forward to having you back again in the future as this continues to roll out. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
And now back to Paris for a look at whether the availability of vaccines will be enough to revive the airline industry. Paris.
Brandis, the airline industry has been devastated by the pandemic. Major U.S. carriers are losing millions of dollars each day, and the losses could total $118 billion by the end of this year. And that has big ramifications for Chicago. But airlines are hopeful for a 2021 recovery as the nation begins the vaccination process. And joining us to share their assessment of the outlook for the industry are Tracy Rzinsky, Chicago-based aviation correspondent for Thomson Reuters, and Joe Sweeterman, professor in the School for Public Service, Department of Public Policy, and the Sustainable Urban Development Program at DePaul University, and a specialist on transportation policy. Welcome back, both of you, to Chicago tonight. First, Joe, the mayor yesterday announced plans for COVID-19 testing for employees and travelers at Chicago airports. How is that going to work?
You know, we're seeing some breakthroughs this week in testing. Chicago rolled out this plan. They're going to be a Terminal 2 to have ticketing. If you're a ticketed passenger and employee, you're eligible to use this service. And there'll be both rapid testing and 2-day testing. It's not cheap. It may be $150 or a bit more, but it's going to give passengers some confidence that they know where to go to get tested. They can even arrive at the airport a little early. And in Midway, it's going to be closer to the parking garage, CTA station. It's a pretty big news story this week.
And there's also going to be that city testing site near the garage at Midway. Tracy Rzinsky, a lot of health experts were worried about the busy travel week during Thanksgiving and whether there would be breakouts tied to folks in airports and on airplanes. Is there any data to suggest any of that materialized?
No. Well, and just to clarify that there really have not been any outbreaks tied to air travel at all. And in terms of, or what I mean to say is on airplanes or at airports, but it's a little too soon to tell whether that Thanksgiving travel in and of itself led to a spike in COVID cases.
All right, Joe Sweeterman, we mentioned the terrible financials for the industry. Does 2021 look like a rebound year?
Well, what a roller coaster, Paris. I mean, in September, the airlines are optimistic. They added lots of schedules. That didn't pan out. They scaled back. Thanksgiving was so-so. Ed Bastian at Delta just announced that he's seeing it flatlining for quite a while. I think, though, just in the last day or two, have all felt a little bit of excitement. First of all, Southwest, their bond rating got improved. We're seeing the vaccine excitement spread everywhere. And so I think finally we're seeing some confidence in the public that we're getting the vaccine and testing system down enough so people feel confident hitting back to the skies.
Tracy Rosinski, what do the financials look like for the big players in this industry? American, United, Delta, Southwest. Could we see a major carrier go out of business?
I don't think we'll see a major carrier go out of business. They are each burning between $12 million and $30 million every single day of cash, so it's a large sum of money. But they have also raised a lot of capital, and they all say that that should get them through at least 2021. What happens after that really depends on the strength of the recovery next year.
And it also may depend on what further assistance they get from the government. Joe Sweeterman, should airlines and the industry anticipate anything out of this latest stimulus bill that's being negotiated?
They do, and the news is spreading fast that we're getting close to a deal. Of course, we've said that before. Airlines did well in that first round, you recall, with the payroll protection. They kept the employees on board. That allowed them to keep a lot of flights in the air, even though the economics weren't good. That ended in October. So now we're waiting for round two of this. And the sense is that airlines aren't going to do quite as well as they did the first time, but all of transportation is positioned really well. And we now know, of course, that the big four are probably okay to skirt bankruptcy. But some of these smaller airlines like Allegiant, Frontier, Sun Country, they're really in a tough spot. And if something doesn't give them Congress, who knows what's going to happen to their ability to fly. And
some of those airlines have had trouble for years. Tracy Rosinski, what about vaccine distribution? You have carriers like American saying they want to distribute the vaccine. How would that work logistically, and how does that play into airlines' recovery?
There is enough vaccine distribution business to go around for all of the major carriers, and this is going to not only be a big part of their cargo business as soon as these vaccines are approved, but going into next year as well. And they're hoping that vaccine distribution can also help them open up some of the passenger routes that have been closed, as well as be that bridge to a place in which people can start traveling normally again.
And Joe Sweeterman, let's bring this back local. O'Hare, Midway, thousands of jobs. The city relies on the tax revenue that comes through there, the tourism that comes through there. How has this all impacted Chicago's airports, and what does the future look like for O'Hare redevelopment?
That's a great. We do know 21 is going to be down. There's some sense that things could start to approach normalcy next summer to perhaps 80% of pre-pandemic volumes. But we know the winter and spring are probably going to be pretty rough. But that means fewer personal facility charges, less parking revenue, all those things, which is going to be tough for the city. And they're now in a situation they got to decide how quickly to proceed with the massive O'Hare 21 plan, the new terminals, the Terminal 2 rebuild, the satellite terminals. And the bond ratings got a little nervous about all airports right now. And so I think the good news is we're still only in the design planning stage of that. We're not, at least for the Terminal 2 project, we have a little time, but it's going to be some tough decisions on whether to slow things down.
Tracy Rosinski, are there deals out there for passengers, and will there be going forward in 2021, just given the state of the industry?
Yes, there are deals if you book ahead of time. I think the closer that you get to your travel date, the higher the fares are, because the fact is there just aren't a lot of flights out there right now. Airlines have reduced their capacity by about 50%. So it's a tough call. They are offering low fares to entice people to get on board and to start flying again, but the truth is, until people really feel comfortable traveling, they don't expect those travel levels to return to what they were before the pandemic.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Lots to talk about. Our thanks to Tracy Rosinski and Joe Sweeterman.
Thank you.
For the first time in decades, there's no clear answer to the question, who will be the next Speaker of the Illinois House? Longtime Speaker Michael Madigan still wants that job, but at least 19 of his fellow Democrats say they won't support him for another term. Amanda Vinicky spoke with some of the first legislators to take that position, and she joins us now. Amanda, what'd you find out?
Well, Paris, the Illinois House Speaker is a powerful job, and really it's been crafted into one largely by Madigan, who's held the post for all but a blip since the early 80s. But it is not the only reason why Madigan is frequently referred to as one of, if not the most powerful politician in Illinois. He is also chair of the Democratic Party of Illinois, and Democrats rule the roost in this state, which is why freshman state representative Tara Costa Howard, running for a second term this November, says she had a lot of soul searching to do this summer after Madigan was identified in federal court papers in which ComEd admitted to a long-running scheme to bribe him. She said she'd already been frustrated that Madigan hadn't been doing enough as Illinois was fighting a pandemic.
I am an attorney. I am a former public defender. So you are innocent until proven guilty. And for me, this wasn't about whether, he's guilty of a crime or not. This doesn't feel right. This is wrong.
Costa Howard in July became the first Democrat to essentially abandon Madigan, announcing that if she were reelected, she would not support him for another term as Speaker.
Let me tell you, the impact was much greater than people realize, particularly because this occurred in the middle of my campaign.
As Speaker and Democratic Party Chairman, it is Madigan who raises big bucks and then uses it to send money as well as support and staff, polling and campaign brochures to Democrats to help them get elected. But Costa Howard told me in an interview that she was essentially punished for her stance.
It had huge ramifications for me when I decided that I needed to say and to speak out that I would not support him.
Ramifications like what?
Well, the largest ramification was fundraising. I mean, I was essentially, while I was basically cut off from the typical large donors.
She says some changes were subtle. For example, the party did send a worker to help her with the race, but this worker was inexperienced and she says not a good fit, unlike the seasoned campaign worker who the Democratic Party had sent to help her in 2018. And the party did offer to help with polling, but Costa Howard says that came too late in the process. And also, she says the party refused to let her ask on that poll a question about Madigan.
It's a very fine line, right? Because you don't want anything to look retaliatory, excuse me. So I think that there was a fine line that was walked.
Costa Howard said she did end up doing her own poll, and she did ask about Madigan. It showed the speaker less popular with voters in her district than President Donald Trump. So while her decision may have been controversial in political circles, that stance on Madigan may have helped with voters. Well, Howard says she didn't accept money from Madigan. She did, however, receive and take money from campaign committees that he controls, according to the Democratic Party of Illinois. Money totaling about $500,000. A DPI spokesperson says Costa Howard faced no repercussions. Rather, she says it was polling that showed it was clear that Costa Howard's race against former Republican Representative Peter Breen wasn't all that tight. Costa Howard was pulling away, so money was shifted to races that were tighter. The spokesperson saying that supporting strong female candidates remains a DPI priority. But retribution can come in other forms.
It is a big deal. And I don't think people really understand, outside of those of us who are living it every day, really understand what it's like to come out and say, I will not be supporting him. As a legislator, we have a responsibility to pass legislation that hopefully benefits our districts. And your legislation could be held up, and it could be something that you've worked on and it's important. It could mean what committee assignments. It could mean projects that come out to your district.
Well, Costa Howard was the first to have previously backed Madigan and then defected. Democratic Representative Anstava Murray of Naperville refused to vote for Madigan as Speaker 2 years ago. She says she did get legislation passed despite that.
I mean, I think it's a couple of things. And number one, I don't think this should be discounted. In the Me Too movement, his chief of staff, Tim Mapes, was taken out of power. And from what I understand, he would have been the ringleader in, quote unquote, making my life a living hell.
She also says she may not have been punished given the reason that she opposed him: ethics and opposition to sexual harassment incidents in Springfield.
I don't think the other women in the caucus would have looked very fondly upon him very openly having retribution against someone who was standing up against that.
Still, Stava Murray says that for 2 years, she requested meetings with Madigan and he never responded. Now, come the 2021 legislature, women Democrats will outnumber male Democrats in the House. And Stava Murray says that that's something that should be considered as Democrats in the caucus battle out who will be the next House Speaker. Now, Stava Murray says she does expect more Democrats to join in the 19 who have already said that they will not support Madigan for another role as Speaker, even if they're not going to come out and say so in public. She says she doesn't necessarily feel vindicated. She says she feels grateful. We have to point out Madigan, not spoken publicly since the ComEd deferred prosecution agreement was announced, but he has issued statements continually denying any role in the ComEd scandal and denying wrongdoing. He has presented himself as Democrats' best choice as Illinois faces some big budget woes. Paris, back to you.
A lot of shaking out that needs to happen between now and late January. All right, Amanda, we'll see you later in the program for Spotlight Politics. But first, a unique virtual concert from Lyric Opera of Chicago, and that's right after this.
Latinos, who make up 1/3 of the population, continue to power the city that works.
These are the people that are working 3 jobs, knowing that COVID is out there. Those are the people that need the help, and we should help them.
And we still have much more ahead on the show, including news of a public official caught breaking the state's COVID restrictions and other stories in this week's Spotlight Politics. But first, this Sunday, Lyric Opera of Chicago is having a virtual concert unlike anything they've ever had before. Arts correspondent Angel Ito takes us to Lyric Opera, which opened its doors for the first time since June to film this virtual concert.
Today I had the joy of recording a duet, El Día Que Me Quieras, with David Portillo, and he's a beautiful tenor, and we've never sung together, so to have that experience was really beautiful.
Hosted by Puerto Rican soprano Ana Maria Martinez with musical accompaniment by Craig Terry, for the first time ever, Lyric Opera of Chicago is hosting a concert entirely sung in Spanish in Pasión Latina. Featuring students from the Ryan Opera Center, each singer tried to choose songs that were best reflective of their talents. For third-year baritone Ricardo Rivera, it was about singing songs that reflected his upbringing in Puerto Rico.
These were songs that were danced to almost every night in these places. And they're recognized immediately by people of maybe 1 or 2 generations prior to ours, immediately. And it's almost like a sense of going back home.
Originally from Oaxaca, Mexico, first-year soprano Denise Velez has been a practicing opera singer for the past 11 years.
Ay de mi llorona, llorona, llorona de un campo lirio.
Pues para mí es, me siento muy afortunada y privilegiada de que pueda cantar en español y mostrar un poco de la cultura mexicana, especialmente cantando esta canción.
While it's a virtual first for Lyric in more ways than one, the artists say they're grateful to bring the community together during this time with their love for the language.
Did Pasión Latina, Latin passion, and I think that there's a lot of joy and strength in passion. Some will be familiar, some will be new discoveries, and I think the language will be the common thread. And I've always thought that a person's favorite word, or the one that will open their heart the most, is their own name. And I think after that, it's their mother tongue. So I am very hopeful that everyone will rejoice who speaks Spanish in this presentation, but also those that don't speak it. They'll still see the beauty and hear the beauty in it.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
Pasión Latina premieres this Sunday evening at 6 on the Lyric Opera of Chicago's Facebook and YouTube channels, with closed captions available in both English and Spanish. You can visit our website for more information. And now, Paris, we go back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, how Black-owned businesses in Chicago's Englewood community are managing 6 months after civil unrest in the area.
Recall will bring the state some accountability.
Plus, our Spotlight Politics team looks at the push to pass a recall measure in the state, which could affect Speaker Madigan. But first, some more of today's top stories. The FBI Chicago office is asking for tips leading to the arrest of a man seen firing a rifle at a metro station. The suspect seen here in this video from the FBI allegedly fired a round from a collapsible rifle at the McCormick Place metro stop on December 1st. And the FBI says the suspect is believed to be 5'8" and of medium or slender build. The public is urged to call the Chicago FBI office or go to its website with tips. And state public health officials report more than 8,200 new cases of COVID-19 in the last 24 hours, with 179 additional deaths. That makes for a total of more than 812,000 cases and 13,666 deaths. The test positivity rate is 11.4%. The Cubs could be getting a tax break from the city due to COVID-19. A city council committee voted unanimously to waive a $250,000 annual bill the team is normally required to pay each year for the renovations on Wrigley Field. The Cubs argued that they deserved the break because they were not allowed to have fans or hold concerts, depriving them of major sources of their revenue. The team is expected to resume paying those yearly fees starting in 2021. This month, WTTW News is checking in on neighborhoods across Chicago where civil unrest occurred this summer, including instances of looting and property damage. Our next stop is Englewood on the south side, where businesses experienced extensive damage along commercial corridors like 63rd Street and Ashland Avenue. 6 months later, Chicago Tonight's Quinn Myers checks in with community organizers and business owners to see how they're holding on and what's next.
I got ill to my stomach. My husband felt ill to his stomach of just the whole situation.
Aisha Butler is the executive director of the Resident Association of Greater Englewood, or RAGE, a group dedicated to community engagement in the Southside neighborhood. This summer, Butler watched as businesses near her home were broken into and looted. Just one portion of widespread damage in a neighborhood that's long struggled with disinvestment.
Our community has been looted for the last 40, 50 years. If you just turn around, I'm in front of an abandoned school. You look across the street, it's abandoned homes. We're talking about years of segregation, years of targeting black folks out of their homes with contract buy-in, making it difficult for African Americans to get loans to open businesses.
After the civil unrest, Butler says people reached out to her eager to support Black-owned businesses in Englewood, but didn't have a centralized way to find them. So her organization began putting together a directory. One business on the list is Englewood Hardware on 63rd Street. Owner Jared Hicks worked here in high school and came back to buy the place a couple years ago.
You got limited black businesses that you used to have here. Years ago when I was coming up, it was, all down through here with Whole Foods. Those are all businesses. You know, 63rd and Halsted. I mean, that's everywhere you went was print shop. You know, somebody was always doing something.
Down 63rd Street near Ashland is another Black-owned business included in the directory, clothing and apparel store Englewood branded. Owner Corey Luckett says most of the surrounding businesses were damaged during this summer's civil unrest, but his store was left untouched.
In fact, people were coming by asking, yo, is everything okay? You good? I had people willing to stand outside the store to protect it, and I just felt like that was just great, and it let me know that I did something right.
Luckett says his Englewood t-shirts and hoodies are about taking pride in the positive aspects of his community, ones that don't get much attention on the 6 o'clock news.
You can be your own business, your own boss, you can grow, you can help the community, and you can do this all at the same time without having any negative surroundings or backlash with it.
It's that attitude Butler and a host of other community groups, like the Inner City Muslim Action Network, or Iman, have applied to an ambitious project called Go Green on Racine. The initiative hopes to revitalize the entire intersection at 63rd Street and Racine Avenue, including a fresh produce market, a business incubator, and a resource center for people returning from incarceration, work Iman has already been doing in the community for years. A central piece of the project is the closed Green Line station here at 63rd and Racine, which organizers say they're advocating to get reopened.
So for us, just like having a vacant school is unacceptable, having a vacant Green Line stop that just rolls past residents is unacceptable.
At the Future Fresh Market on 63rd Street, we met Jake Hatton, who's working on the team renovating the space.
This is like a starting point for the community. We're trying to better this community, make it more comfortable, make it more lovable.
Hatton, who grew up on the West Side, says he sees the project as a model to take to other neighborhoods across Chicago.
I don't want this to stop. I want to continue on this road, and I want others to join in and become a part of this family. Like I said, I'm from the West Side of Chicago, so I'm out here, but I plan to bring it back out there and give others opportunity just like I have gotten.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Quinn Myers.
And WTTW News is continuing our series through the month of December, checking in on different communities months after civil unrest. Next up in the series, we'll be live tomorrow from Chicago's Pilsen neighborhood as part of our Chicago Tonight in Your Neighborhood series. Still to come, our Spotlight Politics team looks at repercussions for Alderman Tom Tunney, who served customers indoors at his Ann Sather restaurant. But first, we're in Chicago Tonight's December Pledge right now, and we have a matching grant that will make your contribution go farther. When you call tonight, your matching gift will be supporting the WTTW Fund for Independent News. This new initiative will provide ongoing financial support for the quality journalism you rely on from WTTW News. Fundraising efforts like this one are critical to the fact-based news coverage we provide because our work is only possible with your support. Call 773-588-1111 or go online to WTTW.com and double your donation.
Now more than ever, trusted local news is vital to our Chicago community. With your contribution to the WTTW Fund for Independent News, you'll join thousands of others in protecting the robust, fact-based news coverage so many rely on. Call 773-588-1111 or go to WTTW.com to make your pledge of support right now. All donations during Chicago Tonight will be matched dollar for dollar by our generous sponsors, Jim and Kay Mabey, up to $10,000. Please give as generously as you can. Call 773-588-1111 or go to WTTW.com. Thank you.
And we're 42 days away from the presidential inauguration. There will be much to report on between now and then, and we'll be sure to keep you up to date on everything that's happening. Even though our political reporting increases during an election season, it's really an extension of the work we do every day. That's because we put a high priority on our political and public policy coverage. We know every city likes to think their political landscape is unique, but in Chicago, we know that's true, and during these times, our political coverage takes on new urgency. We'll keep reporting important stories, but we can't do it alone. Running a strong newsroom takes financial resources. That's why we're asking for your help to support this essential public service. And tonight, the Challenge Grant sponsored by Jim and Kay Mabey will double the impact of your gift. Doesn't take much to make a difference, but it does take the help of everyone who values what we provide here at WTTW News and Chicago Tonight. You can make a matching contribution by calling 773-588-1111 or go online to WTTW.com. And up next, our Spotlight Politics team tackles the latest battle against Speaker Mike Madigan. But first, we take a look at the weather.
Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan floats an income tax hike. Meanwhile, Alderman Tom Tunney rolled for serving diners indoors at his Ann Sather restaurant. Here with all that and much more are our Spotlight Politics team of Amanda Venicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. So, embattled Speaker Michael Madigan, he's floating this tax increase. This is, of course, after Governor Pritzker's so-called fair tax amendment, the graduated income tax amendment, failed at the ballot box. Amanda, so instead of the wealthier paying more, does this mean we all pay more?
So that was always going to be one of the possibilities, especially with the failure of the graduated income tax. Illinois needs to do something, particularly if Governor J.B. Pritzker is going to fulfill his promise to get Illinois back on the path to having balanced budgets. There's going to be some sort of a solution, cuts, tax increase. They've kind of done a whole lot of the easy stuff. What Madigan told, this was reporting from the Chicago Sun-Times, what Madigan told a private meeting that was then leaked of the Black Caucus as he sought their support for another term as Speaker was that he would help to get that done should the governor ask for it. We really don't have a whole lot of details yet, but yeah, it's a possibility.
How much does he want to get this done, Amanda?
I'm not sure that there is any politician who wants to vote for a tax increase. Then again, Madigan certainly has plenty else going on to worry about in his district, has sought, even with the veil of corruption, again, he has said he's done nothing wrong, but regardless, his district has sought to send him back to Springfield repeatedly. So presumably not a big issue for him. But again, there really aren't a whole lot of choices here. If you need revenue, a flat tax and increase along those lines is surely one of the key ways to do it.
Heather, is there support for a tax hike in the General Assembly?
We don't really know because we don't really know what the federal government is going to come forward with as part of a relief package. If there's no relief package, the tax hike is going to be unavoidable just because simply the hole is too big to fill otherwise. If the package includes aid to states, which means Illinois will benefit, it's possible that cuts and more borrowing could fill the gap, but that's completely unknown at this point. However, this is, crunch time really for the state's budget. There is no more low-hanging fruit to pick off. These are all going to be really tough decisions, and Governor Pritzker has said that he will not allow those cuts to fall hardest on the poorest Illinoisans, which means that all of us will probably have to pay a little bit more somewhere along the line.
Heather, should lawmakers then consider putting this tax hike off until they do know what they're getting from Washington?
Yes, I think that we will know by the end of the year, so by December 31st, whether a relief package will pass the GOP-controlled Senate. So that will mean that they will have a little bit more information when they convene in January. And then they will be able to say, well, how long can we wait for an additional package after President-elect Biden takes office and perhaps even has control of the Senate if pending the outcome of the Georgia Senate runoff. So a lot is really up in the air. And I think that state lawmakers will be hoping and crossing their fingers that they won't have to take a vote to hike taxes, but it may be inevitable.
Paris Republican House Leader Jim Durkin wants spending cuts. Could that mean more layoffs?
It could mean more layoffs, Brandis, but it's important to remember that it's hard to find big wholesale cuts in the state budget because the state is statutorily obligated to make certain payments, like the pension payments. It has to fund education at a certain level. It has to fund social services at a certain level. And it seems like there's this game of chicken being played right now. Governor Pritzker says, okay, well, why don't you show us what cuts you're talking about? And reportedly, Minority Leader Durkin hasn't really unveiled what exactly he would want to cut. So you know, it is politically popular to say, we don't want tax hikes, we want cuts. But then it becomes less politically popular when you go out and say exactly what you want to cut and what kind of layoffs that might mean.
So this weekend, as Amanda just mentioned, Mike Madigan told the Black Caucus that they should support him for House Speaker in spite of his waning support in the House. We know that 19 representatives have said they will not support his bid for Speaker. He talked about, you know, his strong leadership and about his ability to steer through a possible tax increase and guiding the remap process. Amanda, what does his support look like in the Black Caucus?
It's hard to gauge that. We didn't get any comment or endorsement after that weekend meeting, again, privately held. Why didn't we get any sort of announcement from the Black Caucus endorsing what had been expected to be Madigan? Well, it may be, again, because some of that audio got leaked and tying to a tax increase, not particularly a popular thing, again, as we've been talking about. So that could be part of it. I do think redistricting is key. For example, in speaking with both the representatives that were featured in the story that I did earlier, Costa Howard and Stava Murray, they're both from the suburbs. Madigan is a big deal there. Voters don't like him. It is certainly very different in many districts, particularly those in Chicago, those represented by many members of the Black Caucus, who don't really give that big a hoot about who is leading the Illinois House. They just want other measures passed, things that the Black Caucus is promoting. Do have to add, there has been at least one member of the Black Caucus, that's Maurice West, out of the Rockford area, who has said he does not support Madigan, but he's a bit of an outlier in terms of just his district and many of his positions.
Now, in light of the state's history of corruption, 2 Republicans have proposed a recall measure. Senator Jason Barrickman of Bloomington and Representative Mark Batnick of Plainfield want to make it easier to recall more elected officials. Take a look.
The people of Illinois have been shut out too long. They are done with corruption, they are done with machine politics, and they are done with Speaker Madigan. Recall will bring the state some accountability when the majority party seems to have little.
Now, Paris, after Rod Blagojevich's indictment, a recall measure passed, but that was just for governor. Is this proposed bill targeted at Madigan?
It certainly seems that way, and you know, right now, you know, piling on the Madigan train is politically, it pays dividends for Republicans. You saw how it impacted the election, tying Speaker Madigan to Justice Kilbride and to the graduated income tax amendment. So any little opening they see to sort of tie Democrats to Speaker Madigan and keep Madigan in the news, they will. I'll caution and say that with state representatives, it's a little bit different than the governor. They serve 2-year terms, so there are constantly primaries and there are constantly challengers talking about running. Maybe makes a little more sense for a recall for a 4-year term, but when there's a 2-year term, it's like Amanda said, the Speaker Madigan adage all the time, there are term limits already. They're called elections.
Amanda, I want to get to COVID, but does this have legs? Could it pass?
I don't think that it is going to get to that point. It's sponsored by Republicans. They're not in control. And in addition to some of the qualms that Paris noted, they're just constitutional questions. So I don't think we're going to get to this point anytime soon.
So not one, but 2 lawmakers were caught violating the state's COVID-19 restrictions. Let's start with the Democrat. One of the mayor's key leaders, 44th Ward Alderman Tom Tunney, also owns the Ann Sather restaurant in Lakeview. There's been dispute over how that's actually pronounced. We'll get back to that. But Heather, what happened at his restaurant and what's the city doing in the way of fines?
Well, he was allowing longtime diners at his Lakeview restaurant. I grew up calling it Ann Sather's. I'm not going to argue with you, Brandis.
Me too.
They have great cinnamon rolls.
Cinnamon rolls, delicious.
So he was letting them in to dine 38 days into this ban imposed by Governor Pritzker. And he was essentially caught out and there were complaints made to the city. So he's now facing 2 citations, which if he is held responsible for could mean that he needs to pay $10,500 to the city. And it was a real embarrassment for the mayor. And she said today she was, quote, deeply disappointed in Alderman Tunney, and she said that he would be held responsible and not made an exception. This has been a clash between Mayor Lightfoot and Governor Pritzker since almost the beginning of the pandemic. Mayor Lightfoot wants restaurants to be able to reopen. The governor has said this is where COVID is spreading. This just couldn't have been sort of a more hot button issue to ensnare one of the mayor's closest allies.
Now, Governor Pritzker spoke out against Alderman Tom Tunney about his restaurant violations, but also against a Republican holiday party with dozens of unmasked people. Take a look at what he had to say to the host, State Representative Brad Halbrook.
Shame on him. Shame on him for having people in a room packed together, not wearing a mask. He knows better. He should know better. If he doesn't, maybe he shouldn't be in the General Assembly.
Amanda, could Representative Halbrook face punishment too?
I don't know how or what that punishment would be. More likely, the venue that hosted this event in Arthur, Illinois, it is sort of a bit different given that Halbrook it's a tough thing when you have politicians not practicing what they preach when it comes to the coronavirus. Representative Halbrook is not one of those who's been preaching about it. He has openly said that he disagrees with the actions that Pritzker has taken, use it as an overreach, is allied with Representative Darren Bailey, who's been behind all of these lawsuits. So this is really in keeping with Halbrook's beliefs, though it may not be safe for Illinoisans, particularly those who attended this bash.
Now, Paris, you broke a story yesterday that Illinois lawmakers want billions back from private health insurers. Tell us more about that.
Well, Brandis, these are two lawmakers, one in the House, one in the Senate, two Democrats, and basically they're saying the Medicaid system in Illinois, it's run as a managed care system. So basically the state pays a lump sum, billions of dollars every year. Half of that, by the way, is reimbursed in federal taxes to these private organizations that manage Medicaid for 2+ million low-income residents in Illinois. And what they're saying is most of these companies are big healthcare companies that are making huge profits in COVID. Companies like Meridian, companies like Blue Cross Blue Shield. Also, they say that because of COVID, utilization rates are down, so fewer people are going to the doctor for big elective surgeries, meaning they're using fewer insurance claims. So the lawmakers are saying, well, what are you doing with that pile of money? We think you're sitting on a pile of money, and frankly, we think you should give that back to the state to redirect to critical care hospitals like Mercy Hospital. The thing is to keep that federal matching those dollars that come in from the federal government for Medicaid, they have to keep this in the healthcare system. So they said, we don't want this money going overwhelmingly to these big healthcare companies. Let's send them to hospitals.
Now, Amanda, I'm sure the hospitals are going to lobby the General Assembly about this, no doubt. What's going to happen? Lawsuits in the future?
Yes, for sure. If anything like this were to pass, which I don't necessarily expect, particularly at this degree, I think it would raise about $3 billion. That's the equivalent of what the graduated income tax constitutional amendment would have done. So makes it sound quite easy to basically plug the budget hole, but I don't think it is going to be that. There certainly is going to be a lot of negotiating around healthcare, and there are issues around these MCO organizations, period, when those contracts are up. But given both federal and state law, I don't think that this is something that will readily fly.
So Heather, Rahm Emanuel continues to make his case for Biden's transportation secretary. You've written extensively about this. Now, the former mayor is facing a good bit of pushback from liberals who oppose his nomination or potential nomination over the way he handled the Laquan McDonald case. Tell us about your story.
Well, I wanted to look back at his 8 years in office to really figure out if the case that he's making for himself, that his legacy in Chicago as a transportation-focused mayor, what did that tell us about what he would do in a Biden cabinet? And really, he focused primarily on two areas, O'Hare and the CTA. And nobody can deny that he really sort of positioned O'Hare, once the pandemic is over, to be expanded by nearly 40% more flights and sort of securing its place as like a global hub in the United States. Also, he directed nearly $8 billion to the CTA, rebuilding all sorts of train lines. But the question is, I think, was those decisions made equitably? And I think if you talk to people on the South Side, they'll say they're still waiting for the Red Line extension to 130th Street, and that bus ridership really dropped during his tenure, and buses are what poor Chicagoans rely on. So he definitely had an ambitious agenda, but in some ways it was clouded with some of those equity issues that we're talking so much about in the wake of George Floyd's death in police custody and as part of the Black Lives Matter movement.
And Heather, has his name also been floated for U.S. Trade Representative?
Yes, and we found out today that he will not be getting that job. So it seems like transportation secretary or bust, and we will be waiting to hear if he is named to Joe Biden's cabinet along with Illinois Senator Tammy Duckworth, who is believed to be a leading contender to lead the Veterans Affairs Department. So we're all on pins and needles, or at least I am anyway.
And that means a vacancy for Governor Pritzker to appoint in the Senate, if that happens.
Amanda, we've got about 20 seconds left. 5 politicians are talking about running for Secretary of State. Who are they? Is it early?
Oh, I don't know if I'm going to get them all in. Let's see. Cook County Clerk Karen Yarborough, City Clerk Anna Valencia, former State Treasurer Alexia Janulius, Alderman Walter Burnett. I'm forgetting somebody. That won't be the
Michael
last
Hastings.
of it. Everybody wants this job. Jesse White has said before that he was going to retire, never actually done it. This time he says he actually means it. It is going to be a hot contest.
Should be fun to watch for those of us who enjoy watching it. My thanks to our Spotlight Politics team, Paris Schutz, Heather Sharon, and Amanda Vinicky. And you can visit our website for more on the stories discussed tonight with our Spotlight Politics team. And while you're there, make sure to check out our guide for things to know about the state's plan for a COVID-19 vaccine. That's all at WTTW.com/news. And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app, and please join us tomorrow night live at 7. We visit Pilsen and its businesses and community leaders for our next In Your Neighborhood.
And an update on the long-awaited final stretch of the Lakefront Trail, which the city hopes to complete by year's end. And we leave you tonight with some more of the Lyric Opera's Pasión Latina performance. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and good night.
Closed captioning is made possible in part by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, wishing all a happy and healthy holiday season.